At the end of the First World War, the leaders of the victorious nations met at Versailles to draw up a peace treaty. Billy Hughes took his place as the Australian Prime Minister. He would be arguing for Australia's right to be heard on the world stage. In his delegation was the journalist Keith Murdoch.
I shall oppose his peace babble.
He says if you refuse to yield, he will walk out.
Good riddance.
And the conference will collapse.
Look! It is intolerable that Wilson dictate to us how the world is to be governed.
Mr. Wilson is the President of the United States of America.
Yes. And if the saving of civilization had depended upon the United States, the world would be in tears and chains today, my boy.
Versailles was the first time an Australian Prime Minister had entered an international conference not as a member of the British delegation, but as the head of an independent, equal member of the family of nations.
Prime Minister, if I understand your attitude correctly, it is this: that the opinion of the whole civilized world should be held at naught in order to satisfy the whim of 5 million people on a remote southern continent.
That's about the strength of it. Well put, Mr. President.
5 million people, for whom you claim to speak.
I speak, sir! For 60,000 dead.
Let's set the scene. In 1914, Australia's population was barely 5 million, and our connection to the world was shaped by Britain, who we saw as the mother country. All of that was about to change, and our story will follow a group of Australians whose experiences during the First World War shaped them, their families, and our country. It's the story of Paul McGuinness, a brash young man from a Victorian dairy farm who would go on to co-found Qantas. The Coles brothers, shopkeepers who experienced tragedy before eventually founding a business empire. Nellie Melba, world-famous opera singer whose tireless fundraising for the war will see her made a dame. And of Thomas Blamey, a former teacher who will rise to the highest military rank of any Australian in our history. Here also are the stories of a politician, an aviator who becomes a diplomat, an unemployed larrikin who becomes a martyr, and a young journalist named Murdoch. When you consider that no Australian family would have been left untouched by the war, you'll begin to grasp how dramatically it would alter us as a nation. Our story starts before the battles and the bloodshed, early in 1914, in a very different Australia. 25-year-old James Pearce is working on a property in far western Queensland. A classic Australian stockman, he's destined to be tragically changed by the war.
Walk on, walk on. Hey, walk on, Seiko, walk on.
Sadness and success are also in the future of a group of brothers in Melbourne. It's 4 months before the war, and the Coles boys are full of hope and ambition as they open their first store in Collingwood.
Open up. All right, here we go.
When George opened the store, he'd built up such an expectation about what this store was going to deliver that there were queues of people outside, and he was largely providing everyday housewares, but he was importing a lot of them because we didn't manufacture them in Australia at the time, and was able to sell them at a low price, and the demand was tremendous.
Arthur? Yes, brother? Get behind the counter.
As George and his younger brothers get down to business, Australia's first global superstar was about to perform a gala concert in London. Her name was Nellie Melba.
Madam Melba,
They tell me that we have at least 8 crowned heads in the audience.
Pleased to hear it, Baxter. I do so like a bit of quality in the house.
For all her fame as an artist, it would be her patriotic fundraising for the Allied cause that would see Nellie Melba created a dame.
Melba had it in spades, there's no doubt about that. She had the high notes, she could sing all the runs and trills and whatnot, and she obviously held the public. She forged herself a wonderful career. She was a great, great star. And so everything that Australia wants to think about her in that respect is right. She was the first great star and remained so.
Nellie went from the gala concert to a party celebrating her 53rd birthday, where she was serenaded by 23 young men. In barely 4 years, 16 of them would be dead. As those boys sang, forces were at work on the other side of Europe that would change the course of history. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was struggling to contain growing nationalist sentiment in the Balkans. Movements demanding self-government were growing, and radical young nationalists were ready to use violence to overthrow foreign rule. Events that would lead to a war that was to take at least 20 million lives began with the loss of 2. Gavrilo Princip assassinated Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife. It has become known as the shot heard around the world, a shot that inflamed the rivalry for influence between the great powers of Europe. It was 37 days before the war. On the other side of the world, a family of dairy farmers are oblivious to the consequences this would have on them.
Wait until it stops.
Sorry, Herbert.
Keep telling you, wait till
Sorry,
it
Herbert.
stops.
Who wants to see it?
Boots!
Sorry, Mum.
Slow down, kid.
Boots! Herbert, do you think this might come to anything?
What's that?
What's happened?
Some madman's murdered the Crown Prince of Austria.
How awful.
Happens all the time over there.
I feel sorry for his poor wife.
They killed her too. Oh, that is so wicked.
They have no rules.
Is that what it is, James?
Is that what is?
The news of the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand and his wife sent a painful sensation through London. King George and the German Kaiser sent touching messages of condolence.
It's too terrible.
Don't fret, sis. We'll look after you. Won't we, Herbert?
Families all over Australia were about to be caught up in a European catastrophe. For the McGuinness family, it would ultimately mean both tragedy and fame. 30-year-old Thomas Blamey, already a soldier, was training in England.
Young for a major.
A record, sir, for the permanent forces.
He went into the First World War having been an exceptional student of military and having gone to Staff College, one of the very few colonials, as they called them then, that went to the British Army Command and Staff College.
Soldiering in the blood, Blamey?
No, sir. I was originally a teacher.
Where? No, probably not. In Australia. What do they think of the whole Balkan situation?
Don't know, sir. I think their minds are focused on the forthcoming election.
The First World War would become the crucial stepping stone in Blamey's long career. A career which would see him reach the highest level of military command as Australia's only Field Marshal. In 1914, Australians believed in empire, king and country. So the campaign for the federal election on the eve of the war was loudly patriotic and full of imperial sentiment.
And thank you for coming to welcome and to meet our most important guest. Please welcome the leader of the loyal opposition, the Honourable Andrew Fisher. Turn your eyes towards a European situation and give your kindest feelings to the mother country at this time.
A love of empire auction is developing. Who loves the empire more? Who is willing to show true love of empire?
I sincerely hope that international arbitration will avail before Europe is convulsed in one of the greatest wars of any time. But should the worst happen, Australia will stand beside her own to help and protect her to her last man and the last shilling.
And it took us a long, long time to pay back the last shilling.
Andrew Fisher's extravagant promise won the day. He was elected Prime Minister and Billy Hughes became his Attorney General. Germany had declared war on Russia, France and Britain. The British Empire was at war. Australia was also at war.
Extra! Germany declares war on Russia. Read all about it. Extra! Thank you, sir.
For most Australians, the war was a world away. But Nellie Melba's career had flourished in Europe, and she felt the threat of war more keenly than most Australians.
Good morning.
Is this your emporium?
Yes, mine and my brother's. It is Madame Melba.
I am recently returned, and I'm shocked by the lack of seriousness. I am motoring around, asking shopkeepers why they are not flying the flag. I believe you should be flying the flag.
I'll see to it.
At this time of terrible danger.
Yes, madam. I'll definitely see to it.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Monday, the 3rd of August, Australia sends to Britain a very famous cable. The cable offers to Britain an expeditionary force of 20,000 men. The cable indicates that the force will be available for service anywhere in the world under British command. Any composition of soldiers that Britain determines will be supplied. Australia will pick up the entire bill.
The unquestioning belief that Australia's role was to stand beside the British Empire dictated the actions of many, including James Pearce in remote Queensland, the Coles brothers in Collingwood, and the McGuinness family on their farm in Victoria.
A state of war exists between Great Britain and Germany. According to Colonel Foster, no danger to Australia or Australian shipping is expected from Germany.
That's good.
Belgium is offering unexpected resistance to Germany. Lord Emmett in the House of Lords said there was no immediate necessity to accept the Overseas Dominion's offer of troops. The Germans invaded France through Luxembourg, but were repulsed. The morale of the French army was described as superb. The British government has accepted the Australian offer to send an expeditionary force of 20,000 troops.
Can't squib it, Mother. You wouldn't want that.
A lot of Australians joining up thought that they were going on a tourist ship, that it would all be over, but they would get to England and see what they would otherwise never be able to see in their life.
In Melbourne, Arthur Coles went with his brother George to enlist.
Good on you, boys.
It's only me that's going, Sergeant.
What's wrong with him?
I'll take my turn if needed. I hear the recruiting speeches and it stirs my inside same as any man. I know I have to go if I'm called.
He's to take care of the business.
Meanwhile, the McGuinness boys were signing up in Warrnambool.
Paul McGuinness.
Ready and willing. And I got my own horse, Silk by name, he'll stand the test.
Go home, Paulie. He's 17. That right?
No?
Yes. Better get your father to sign it. Our father's dead.
Suppose you better sign me up then.
In your brother's place.
No, he'll be back. You put your shirt on that.
Brian Norton.
The average digger is actually an urban dweller. The numbers of single men that put their hands up to enlist is really quite staggering.
In Queensland, James Pearce rode 60 kilometres to Winton in order to enlist.
Everyone's notions of Australian security were bound up very closely with the idea of protecting the white quality of Australia's race as it was seen at the time. And the second core value for which Australians were fighting was the British Empire. And imperial loyalty was a very dominant value at the time.
Mother? Mother? You have to sign this paper.
Too young to go, Paulie.
That's why Mother has to sign it. You have to sign it.
Mother, tell him he's too young.
Take your horse. They'll put you in the mounted units. Much better than having to walk everywhere.
Thanks, Ma.
I'm proud to give permission for my son to volunteer for the Empire.
As soon as war was declared, there was a rush to enlist. The newly elected Prime Minister, Andrew Fisher, found his promise to deliver 20,000 men for the war effort easily exceeded. Caught up in the enthusiasm was a young journalist, Keith Murdoch.
The Minister for Defence has asked the Australian Journalists Association to nominate our official war correspondent.
Yes, I am aware.
20 of your colleagues put themselves forward. 2 were shortlisted. You came second.
I know that.
I'm never going to intervene, Keith. Charlie Bean got the nod in a ballot.
Yes.
He's 6 years your senior.
I cannot overlook the fact that all the cabling and writing in the world is not going to win this war.
Murdoch couldn't work out what was his duty. Should he enlist in the AIF, which all his instincts told him he should do, or should he, as a coming newspaper man, I mean, he wasn't a leader, but as a coming newspaper man, should he remain in his profession? And Fisher gave him very strong advice.
My brothers are to enlist, and I feel that perhaps it is my duty.
In my opinion, you should stick to the news business. You may be of some service there, but you would make an indifferent soldier.
Andy, look, I'm sorry, you're busy.
Murdoch, William Hughes, Attorney General.
Ah, Murdoch.
If I may be of service to you, Mr. Hughes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
He's feeling grieved. Charlie Bean's pipped him for the plum.
Yeah, looks like a rebounder. Now look, Andy, we must push through this war precautions bill quick smart.
Must we?
The War Precautions Act would give the government unprecedented power to censor and regulate. Billy Hughes, from humble beginnings, working mixed trades and speaking on street corners, was ambitious. He was energised by the war and the opportunities it presented. He had risen to Attorney General. In his mind, he was the Prime Minister in waiting.
Oh my God, man, there's enemies in our midst.
Who?
Aliens.
Well, what do you want to do about it, William?
Lock them up. Lock up anyone who's even been to Germany for a holiday. And then there's these naysayers on street corners. I mean, we cannot have this in times of an emergency. Cannot have it, Andy.
The latest reports from the fighting around Liège state that only small parties of Germans have entered the city. Oh, it breaks my heart. I so love Belgium. My debut.
Excuse me, sir, we have a visitor.
Oh, my dear fellow, come along, come along. You know my daughter, Johnny Monash. Done some engineering work for me.
Madam Melba?
Mr. Monash.
His engineering background, along with his senior rank in the militia, gave John Monash a unique perspective as a military strategist and tactician. He would rise during the course of the war to command the Australian Corps.
What's all this?
Into the army, Mr. Mitchell.
Why do you want to be a soldier, Monash? You're a jolly good engineer. That bridge you built will last 1,000 years.
Then we must make sure the Australia and the Empire also last.
Godspeed. Godspeed.
Melba became quite involved in the war effort. She raised an enormous amount of money, and she was quite prepared to use her talents and her reputation to raise more and more funds for the Red Cross.
Open your wallets. Dear ladies and gentlemen, flags of the Allies. First, we have Japan. What am I bid for this lovely flag?
Melba would go on to raise what would, in today's values, be the equivalent of many millions of dollars for the war effort.
40, 50, 55 guineas.
Sold to you, sir, for 55 guineas. And now, the flag of dear little Belgium, I hold in deepest reverence.
Belgium was a very powerful mobilising cause, in particular in the early stages of the war, partly stimulated, of course, by propaganda which emphasised the civilian sufferings, which were very substantial. You didn't have to invent them.
On the 1st of November 1914, Australian and New Zealand troops set sail for the war. They were the first of thousands who would sail round the world. Amongst those who went to the war in the weeks that followed were Thomas Blamey and a young labourer from Melbourne who would become Australia's most renowned fighting soldier, Albert Jacka.
First time I've been out of Victoria.
I was recently in the mother country. I came back, turned straight around. Off I go again.
So, off to France, are we, Chief?
We are. Off to fight the Kaiser.
Thanks for the light, Colonel.
Major. Better learn.
Right. Bert Jacka.
Tom Blamey.
The first AIF was a volunteer force. The only qualifications were physical fitness and age. So from all around Australia, all sorts of people, well-educated, barely educated, professional soldiers like Blamey, labourers like Albert Jacka, shopkeepers like Arthur Coles gathered to do their bit. All they had in common was a sense of duty.
Arthur Coles. Arthur. Bert Jacka. Hard to know what to think. Just hope I don't let folks down.
All the press during the period of enlistment is all about how the troops are going to England, that they will be fighting in a place of honour alongside British troops in Belgium and France. They will be fighting to put right a great evil, namely the German invasion of Belgium.
What's that you're doing?
It's a map, Mum. Came with the newspaper. Free of charge.
Why do we need a map? Afon?
It's to follow the war, Mrs.
Oh, I see.
This is Mon's mother, where there's been a terrible battle.
And now?
Now it seems like everybody's sitting tight.
When the McGuinness boys get to France, I'll thrash the Kaiser.
They're just a week into the trip north through the Indian Ocean when suddenly the war in which Australia and Britain are embarking upon explodes dramatically, a giant escalation of the war into the Middle East.
Australia!
What's the matter, Bill? I swear I'm 19, but I haven't exactly seen a full-grown woman undressed. Now you have, and you won't forget it. Drinks, boys.
Almost none of the men of the first AIF had any hope of travelling beyond Australia's shores. They were quite unprepared for the shocks of climate and culture that awaited them in Egypt.
Doesn't look much like England. No, well, out of the goodness of their hearts, they thought the climate there might be a bit too harsh for you, Private Jacker. So, they're training here under the Jippo sun. Blooming long way from Berlin. We'll meet there one day, Jacker.
Britain intends to back up Russia and France to the hilt in the face of any German threat. Promises are made to Russia. In order that Russia keep fighting, she has promised her most cherished war objective. She has promised access to the Mediterranean through the Dardanelles. Australians are not asked if they approve of this.
The main landing is made by the British 29th Division, and they're to land at the toe of the Gallipoli Peninsula in support of the main British landing. We hear that the 3rd Brigade lost its direction and landed on the wrong beach.
The Ottomans at that time, more or less ready for this invasion, their soldiers, their officers, their system turn out to be better than the British. So actually it is an Ottoman victory gained by the Ottomans, not because of some geographical factors or some of the leadership failures of the Allied side.
After the landing, the Anzacs dug in and a stalemate followed. Patrols went looking for enemy weak spots.
You are a staff officer, Blamey.
Yes, sir, and that, sir, is why I need the best intelligence.
But it is not why you yourself must go wandering off into the darkness, is it, Major?
The landing of this force was a very remarkable and gallant feat of arms, sir, on which we should now consolidate.
On Gallipoli, he was a staff officer the whole time. As a staff officer, you need to get out and see what's going on. You can't spend the whole time in the headquarters.
Go on. Take 2 men with you.
Yes, sir.
And try to bring them back.
I know he led a skirmish with 2 other Australians, a bombardier and a sapper, I think it was, into the trenches at night. They walked into big trouble. He was an intensely loyal man, not only to his superiors, but to his subordinates and to everyone who put their faith in him. Blamey had an awesome sense of command. You could feel it coming from him personally when you're in his company.
Major, look.
He was an extremely tough taskmaster, but he was focused on getting the job done, and he wasn't unfair.
Yes, hello. You speak English? No, français. Un peu. Je souhaite organiser une trêve. Pardon? Pour les morts. Ah, oui,
Truce.
paix.
What?
Look, he wants to organise a burial party.
Could be a trick.
Oh, there's only one way to find out.
Some might have shot first and asked questions later, but Thomas Blamey negotiated a remarkable truce. For the man on Gallipoli, letters were the only way of reaching out to the ones you loved. James Pearce, the stockman, who'd spent so much of his life alone, tried to explain his war experience to his family.
My dear sister, we are now camped on Anzac Beach, hearing local engagements and all more eager than ever to have a go and finish this. And show Turkey he has backed the wrong horse.
For a certainty, we are on a sure win, but are not going to have a walkover before the stakes are handed in on settling day. Yours sincerely, hope all at home is well, your fond brother, Jim.
Dear Mother, we came into the trenches and have been here ever since.
I'm now sitting in a trench and Mr. Wilson is sitting beside me running home. The rifles are cracking all around.
Doing no harm, as the bullets either go overhead or into the bank. The other day, we had an armistice to bury the dead. 50 Turks to one of our men. Goodbye, Mother. Love to all. Paul.
Everyone thought victory would come quickly at Gallipoli, but when it didn't, the home front grew anxious.
Order! Order! The Honourable the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do say that I do not believe conscription is necessary. Though I do not say the future may not hold within it possibilities which may shatter our present conceptions of what is necessary. For no man can say what this frightful war may yet involve.
At 4:30 a.m. on the 7th of August, the Light Horse was ordered to charge. In their ranks was Paul McGuinness. He was 18 years old.
They leave their trenches, and within the period of less than an hour, 4 lines are mowed down with over 400 casualties in an area that's really, I guess, the size of a tennis court.
It's an Australian officer that sends the second and third lines over the top. This is an Australian decision. It's not a British decision. It's a tactical decision made on the ground by Australian officers.
I knew that should I move, the Turks would know I was alive and take care of it. So what's to do?
I kept my mind employed, so I should not worry.
I counted and counted all day. And once I reached 7,000 odd and got off track. So then I simply numbered off single hundreds. When I started back from the Turkish line, bullets seemed to buzz around me like mosquitoes.
Don't shoot! Please, Paul McGuinness, don't shoot! Don't shoot, please!
Private McGuinness, number 324, B Company D Troop. Private McGuinness, number 324, B Company D Troop. Number 324, B Company D Troop. B Company D Troop.
300 men of the 8th Light Horse charged. 234 were casualties, 154 were killed. Paul McGuinness wrote to his mother, "I hardly got a scratch."
I suppose by now you have heard about the heavy fighting and about our regiment being in it. Major Redford was killed.
Tom Redford?
I must write to the poor man's mother.
We got Major Redford's body and buried him. I went back to get his head. His body was in peace.
Stories like the one told by Paul were reaching families all over Australia. The enthusiasm for empire was being tested, and the political pressure on PM Andrew Fisher was building.
I am making the people stump up for this fearful war. They won't thank me if all we have to offer them is casualty lists.
Sir Ian Hamilton reports that through their gallantry and dash, Australians and New Zealanders have trebled the area they held. It can be reported that there are many signs that Turkey is tiring of the campaign. You don't believe it?
I believe the casualty lists. When do you go to London?
In a couple of days. I'm taking over the United States.
I know. Go to Gallipoli for me.
Fisher used Murdoch because of his feelings, his uneasiness about what was going on in Gallipoli, and his feeling that he perhaps wasn't getting the whole story, and his fear that it was going to turn into a disaster.
Why do you want me to go there?
Because the men are complaining that the mail isn't getting through.
Really?
No, Keith. Not really.
He's not going to ask Charlie Bean. He's reading the stories that Bean's sending back. And Bean, he wouldn't trust Bean to give an honest account of the prospects on Gallipoli.
Thomas Blamey, who had served on Gallipoli since the first day, had been sent to Cairo for medical treatment.
Miss Deacon, won't you join us? Miss Deacon is the daughter of our former Prime Minister. And Miss Borman is the governess here.
Do you have business here, Miss Deacon? For the Red Cross, I am organising a bureau to inquire into those listed as missing.
Valuable work.
Mother read a book by David Cecil, and he started a tracing bureau in the Red Cross with volunteers in London. And she thought at an early age that that was a very important thing to do.
When do you return to the active list, Colonel Blamey?
Oh, a day or two. I've been receiving treatment.
Hemorrhoids.
Sir Ian Hamilton's been recalled, did you hear? That Murdoch fellow's letter really put a cat amongst them.
Murdoch's role is clearly very significant in relation to the Gallipoli campaign. I mean, he, writes the famous the Gallipoli letter. What is it? It's about 8,000 words, I think. It's certainly a very long letter in which he's very critical of the ways in which, that campaign was being run.
Murdoch received an appraisal from Ashmead Bartlett. He's been there since the landing, but they confiscated it.
I'd have done the same.
You would?
Under the War Precautions Act.
Aye. Well, Murdoch wrote his own report. It's made him quite a celebrity in London.
What of you, Andrew? Thought any more about moving to London?
Fisher could feel the hot breath of Billy Hughes on his neck, and he had the prospect of doing a deal with Hughes to swap the Prime Ministership for the very lucrative job, the more lucrative job, of being High Commissioner in London. And eventually, in October, he agrees to do that.
With Andrew Fisher taking the post of High Commissioner, Billy Hughes realised his ambition. He became the Prime Minister of Australia.
Billy Hughes undergoes a transformation in the Great War. Is Billy Hughes the pragmatist, and Billy Hughes the opportunist, and Billy Hughes the ruthless mover and shaker of influence and numbers and knowing what he wants, and what he wants is power, and what he gets is power.
I ask the honourable and learned gentleman whether the time had not yet arrived. For the sending of our men to Gallipoli means sending them to useless slaughter. That we had some discussion on the subject.
The Honourable the Prime Minister.
Hughes believed that Australia had a duty to the Empire, but he could also see a bigger picture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry the question has been asked.
As Australian Prime Minister, he could be a hero in London, where he had spent much of his youth.
This government does not have the responsibility of directing the campaign. Our business is to follow the instruction of the Imperial government and to provide that government with our hearty and enthusiastic support. And it is our clear duty to refrain from criticizing the actions of men who have been placed in frightful positions. Now, I do not pretend to understand what is happening in the Dardanelles. But I do know the duty of this government. And that is to mind its own business and to provide a quota of men that the Imperial government deems necessary. And that we shall do.
If a nation is to be united, forward-looking, peaceful, constructive, I think he was about the worst Prime Minister Australia's ever had.
For us looking back, the years 1914 to 18 are dominated by the Great War. But to Australians who lived through that era on the home front, the war was distant, and the things of immediate concern to daily life were the rising cost of living and unemployment. On the home front, there was a class war. Mervyn Flanagan was a horse driver by profession. In and out of trouble, unemployed as the war took hold, yet destined to become a key figure in the violent domestic events that would shake the foundations of Australian society.
Merv Flanagan comes from a very working class family.
Flanagan, you best come in now.
He drank, and from his police record, one would anticipate that he was a bit of a larrikin.
I'll nick off and enlist.
You will not!
What are we going to feed them on? Dirt? It's all found and 5 bob a day to send home.
My Norrie gets 6 shillings a day.
All right, 6. It's 6. But you'd not begrudge me a shilling for myself, would you?
Men like you, Brosy Flanagan, stop bullets with their chest, and then where will we be?
You'll cope, Beattie. I'm sure of it.
No doubt many joined the army out of economic necessity.
It's a boy!
After all, a steady wage of 6 shillings a day was hugely appealing when work was scarce.
Right hand. No. Raise your right hand. You hold the book in your left. Now repeat after me. I, Mervyn Flanagan, do swear
Ambrose.
that... What?
It's Mervyn Ambrose Flanagan. I'd care to be known as Ambrose.
And why is that?
Because I do.
I, Ambrose Flanagan, do swear that I will well and truly serve our Sovereign Lord the King.
I, Ambrose Flanagan, do well and truly swear that I will serve our Sovereign Lord the King. Next!
Mervyn Ambrose Flanagan was joining a war that was becoming truly global. Australians had been deployed to fight the Turkish Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. Among those serving there, one of Australia's first ever military aviators, Thomas White.
His
was one of just seven men to apply for entry into the Central Flying School. I mean, he's born well over a decade before the first aeroplane ever flies. He grows up in a world where motor cars are a rarity, much less aeroplanes.
Dear brother, just a few lines in case anything should happen to me tomorrow. I have been detailed for a somewhat difficult, risky task.
White describes it as a suicide mission. Their instructions are to fly to Baghdad, to land on the ground and to use explosives to destroy some telegraph lines. And that's so the Turks, once the battle starts, won't have the ability to call reinforcements into the area. Given the mechanical capability of the aircraft, given the distances that they were flying, it really wasn't a feasible operation.
Tomorrow is Friday the 13th. I am a bit superstitious, but really think we shall be successful. Well, Perth, hoping that I'll be writing to you again in a few days. Yours, Tom.
White and his co-pilot, Yates Brown, crashed in enemy territory. For White, capture marked the start of 2.5 years as a prisoner of war. His life would be changed in the most unexpected way by the work he did as a prisoner of the Turks.
What's that music?
NAPTHORNE.
Tell me what.
Jack. Enver Pasha's ordered 2 days of celebration. They chased the invader out of their country.
Sorry?
We've abandoned Gallipoli.
Abandoned it?
So I hear.
Whatever will happen in this war, do you think, Jack?
After the evacuation from Gallipoli, many Anzacs went into a military camp on the island of Lemnos.
Know who that is? No? Oh, why don't you tell me? Albert Jacka.
He scored our first Victoria Cross.
Plenty of time for me yet?
Men like Paul McGuinness and Albert Jacka had distinguished themselves in Gallipoli, but Merv Flanagan hadn't even left Sydney before getting into trouble.
4 days, Corporal.
That is correct, sir. He was 4 days with the battalion before reporting sick.
You brought it with you, Private Flanagan.
Must have.
Between your medical and taking the oath, you went out and got the clap.
It's estimated after they started keeping records that something like 60% of the Australian population under the age of 40 had suffered from a venereal disease at least once.
Was it with a woman you knew?
Well, I knew her at the time.
Don't try and crack funny, Flanagan.
He's all clear, Corporal. You can send him back to his battalion.
Sending Mervyn Flanagan back to his battalion might not have been the best move. Most of the men who enlisted in the army were single, from the city and from working-class backgrounds. They were unionised, so when the army tried to introduce extended drilling hours, they reacted by going on strike. And in their thousands, they marched from their camps in Sydney's west, took over trains and made their way to the centre of the city to march and to demonstrate. And Merv Flanagan was right in the thick of it.
We're gonna drill 40.5 hours, boys? No! Come on, boys.
The government was not about to stand for a strike, which it regarded as a mutiny.
The Minister directs as follows. All men to parade tomorrow at 11 o'clock a.m. Those that do not attend the parade will be discharged.
Most of the striking soldiers did report as ordered by the minister. But 279 soldiers did not obey, and they were discharged from the army.
All right,
What are you doing here?
I've come home.
On leave? Mervyn Flanagan, they chucked you out? What are you good for, Brosy?
Before long, Flanagan's rabble-rousing streak would bring tragedy to the streets of Sydney. The Prime Minister was ignoring the problems that were disrupting life at home. Billy Hughes had been swept up by the business of the war and by London society.
Ladies and gentlemen, please pray silence for the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia, the Honourable William Morris Hughes.
Thank you.
For some reason or other, Australian Prime Ministers seem to have a need to go and feel that they're at the heart of empire, that they're important, that they're contributing, to the decision-making of the empire.
I feel that I stand here today in the reflected glory of the Australian soldier. I never speak, I cannot speak of their bravery, but that I choke with emotion. I am glad of the opportunity to again state what is at present the very inspiration of our lives. Our determination to save our civilization from the onslaught of the barbarous Prussia.
The British are very good at duchessing people, making them feel more important. You're more important to us than anyone else, they'll say to you. But they'll say that to the next chap too.
I have no doubt, nor has any Britisher or Australian, no doubt of what the result shall be. We shall win.
It was becoming increasingly clear to Hughes that to meet his recruitment commitment, he would have to introduce conscription. And even in London, he never missed an opportunity to seek support for his cause from those with influence.
Miss Deacon.
Mr. Hughes, how very nice to see you.
You, I believe, have located in London.
For my work, I have relocated the Wounded and Missing Persons Bureau from Cairo to remain close to the troops.
Yes.
And you, Mr. Hughes?
Imperial Conference. Concerns aplenty, Miss Deacon. But between ourselves, the greatest concern is that of the loyalty of our fellow countrymen.
Oh, it cannot be doubted.
If you saw the recruitment figures, they've tumbled, madam. I fear we may have to resort to conscription. Any voice that would support such a government initiative would be very weighty, very, very weighty.
I may not take a side in any debate.
Yes, well, in a day or two, the men will land in France. They must have reinforcements.
I am an officer of the Red Cross, and whether you are Prime Minister or the Governor-General, I'm afraid I must refuse to answer.
Yes. Very pleasant evening to you, Miss Deacon.
On March the 21st, 1916, the Anzacs began arriving on the Western Front. Among them was Paul McGuinness's older brother, James.
Excuse me, sir. James McGuinness, 47th Battalion?
Yes?
Well, where is it?
The war.
No, the 47th.
Keep going, front of the train.
Rightio.
Radio, sir.
Blamey! Time to meet the real enemy.
So you agree the war will be won or lost here in France?
No doubt about it, Tom. So, wish us both the best of fortune.
Monash was a man of broad vision. Blamey, an organiser with a great eye for detail. Together, they'd form a partnership that would significantly influence military planning.
People like Monash have had much more recognition given to them than Blamey.
Blamey.
And if you're talking about giving recognition to Blamey, people say, oh, you can't give recognition to Blamey. This dreadful man, he was seen drinking. And somehow that disqualifies him from receiving credit for some other things that he might well have done.
Who is Miss A. Borman?
No idea.
Well, she writes
Kindly treat this matter as confidential.
Well, what matter's that?
Whether Lieutenant Colonel T.A. Blamey of 2nd Division Headquarters is a married or a single man.
Married.
And what concern is that of Miss Borman?
I have no idea.
She lives in Cairo. All right, Blamey. Just remember the good name and all that.
There's some truth behind some of the stories. There are people who wanted to find whatever stories they could to, in some way, blacken Blamey's name. He, of course, was his own worst enemy in several respects. He had a saying, he doesn't care much what others think. Well, it doesn't work that way when you're the man at the top. It does count what others think.
As the main body of Australian troops was moving up to the front lines in France, light horsemen like Paul McGuinness had been reunited with their mounts in Egypt and were preparing to fight the Turks.
You bring that nag with you?
I did. Silk, that's his name. Sim looked after him fairly good when I was on Anzac.
How long were you over there?
Long enough.
I think it had taken its toll on him while he was in Gallipoli. People think they're an adult at 18, you know, but he was just going on 18 when they sent him there, and, you know, you haven't seen any of life yet, and you go along and you're seeing people being blown up and having their heads shot off and all that sort of thing. And you're living in fear every day of being killed. It's enough to give anybody problems.
Dearest Mother, I'm going on a 5-day trip and we intend attacking a Turkish position.
Once the Gallipoli campaign finishes, the concern is that the Ottoman Empire, with its troops now freed up from Gallipoli, will be able to undertake an expedition against the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is a vital lifeline to the Far East and Australasia.
It may be hard luck to get hit out, but if I do, dear Mother, then I have only done my duty.
We'll send a full account later if I have any luck.
Well, I pray he has luck. One brother in the desert.
Jim and Herbert, both in France.
I'll make prayers for all of them.
Sergeant McGuinness.
Yeah.
So the aviators report that the Turks are drilling for new wells. And you're to destroy their machinery. We're going in at dawn.
Oh, I could quite fancy that for a laugh.
What? Smashing machinery?
Aviation, you drongo.
Good night, sir.
Jif Jaffa was essentially about denying waters to the Ottoman army. And they did that by destroying the water sources, making them impossible to use for any large formed body of enemy troops. So when the light horse attack, it's over fairly quickly.
Are we chasing after them, McGuinness?
Maybe you can sport, but our orders are to smash this drilling machinery.
Yes, Sergeant.
All right, lads!
Paul McGuinness was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his role at Jif Jaffa Wells. In the spring of 1916, with the war at its height, Prime Minister Billy Hughes was continuing his campaign to influence events in London. Self-promotion was never far from Billy's agenda, and Keith Murdoch had become his unofficial agent. A year after the Anzacs landed at Gallipoli, Murdoch, at Hughes' instigation, would orchestrate an event that has come to symbolise the sacrifice of war and define Australia's identity.
Excuse me, sir.
Oh, good morning, Prime Minister.
May I take your coat, sir?
No. Close the door. Behind you. Butler.
Valley.
Need your help.
Of course. The speech was well received.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your touches. Now, Anzac Day anniversary coming up. Need a bit of a show to strike a spark. You seen the recruitment figures?
Hughes and Murdoch are a double act.
but they're a double act which is essentially controlled by Hughes. So Murdoch does Hughes's bidding. He makes what Hughes wants to happen, happen.
Anzac anniversary.
Anzac Day, yes, need a bit of a show.
Well, plenty of Australian troops in and around London. They could march.
Yes, in a service.
Westminster Abbey.
I give a speech.
Of course you do.
Murdoch seems to have been one of the figures behind the first celebration of Anzac Day in London. Murdoch, being a journalist, was able to get the British press to advertise that there was going to be this march of Australian and New Zealand soldiers to Westminster Abbey.
On the shining wings of your valour, we were lifted up to heights we had never seen. You taught us things we never knew.
The crowds in the London streets were the biggest since the King's coronation, and it was instrumental in embedding it, you know, as the narrative that would become dominant about World War I.
Your Mr. Hughes is making quite an impression, if I may say so.
He's of a type, Dawkins. We might term him a blowhard.
Might you, sir?
I'm arranging publication of his collected speeches. If you're an admirer, I'll reserve your copy.
But that's very thoughtful of you, sir. But my duties leave me with little spare time.
To George Pearce, Acting Prime Minister of Australia. Thinking it might interest you to hear something about Hughes's visit, I am sending these few lines. He has been a phenomenal success.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Empire is in her greatest hour of need. And as the Prime Minister...
You may be sure we are all delighted. A great effort will be made to get Hughes to stay here. There is even talk of him joining the cabinet.
Stunting again, Billy.
Hughes made 2 visits to Britain during the war, and that's a long time to be away for a Prime Minister of a very small nation, thousands and thousands of miles from the centre of action.
Stockman James Pearce was also away from the action. After fighting in Gallipoli, he transferred to the Service Corps.
Why did we volunteer for the Service Corps, eh, mate? Briggsy, Clem Briggs, Jim Pearce. Gets us out of the firing line, eh, Jim? I never expected we'd be on our way back to Egypt. Just delivery boys, that's all we are.
The SS Minneapolis had been attacked by a German U-boat and sunk. James Pearce was among those rescued, but wounds aren't always visible.
We now know with post-traumatic stress disorder that the trauma can happen one day and the reaction or the disorder can be created within an hour, a day, a month or a year.
The damage that the war was doing to James Pearce was invisible, but it would consume him.
I am obliged to return to Australia, Murdoch, so I bid you farewell. I should arrive back in Australia by the end of July. I'll cable.
I wish you safe passage.
Miffed to be going, really. Oh, war could change in an instant if Haig's plans for tomorrow come off, which I expect they will. It will be a great day. Goodbye.
The next day was the 1st of July 1916, the first day of battle of the Somme. It remains the worst day in Britain's military history, with 20,000 killed. The disaster on the Somme meant that fresh troops, among them Australians, would soon be heavily engaged both there and in Flanders.
McGuinness! They've upped you to corporal, Jim.
Is that right?
Good?
Yeah, why not? Any news, Fred? We're getting sick of waiting.
The test will come soon enough. You've got a stripe, Jim. Wear it well.
Hey.
The idea is to put the Australians into the Western Front quite slowly, allow them to get used to going out patrolling and the realities of the different kind of warfare. That doesn't last long.
Kathleen, our farmer's been in to get the newspaper. Australians in battle. Capture of enemy trenches. Failure of right wing. Retire with severe losses. A report by Captain Charles Bean of British headquarters. Yesterday evening, an Australian force attacked the German trenches.
Was Jim there?
Oh, Herbert. Hush. On the left, the Australians seized the German front line. In the centre, the Australians carried the whole of the German first system of trenches and reached more or less open country.
It was as much information as the censors would allow. The truth might have been dangerous. And the truth was, Australians had seen their first significant action on the Western Front at a place called Fromelles. On the 19th and 20th of July, in 24 hours, Australia had suffered 5,533 casualties, and no advantage had been gained. For Paul McGuinness in the Middle East, it was also a bloody affair, as Ottoman forces launched their attack on Romani.
Pull him back, boys! We're going after him!
The Australian and New Zealand and British mounted troops that are there have a pretty desperate day. It is a day of hard fighting. They ultimately hold the line against the Ottomans, and as the day wears on and the Ottoman troops have had to fight to gain the positions for the main attack, they've been running out of water. And as the day wears on, they're not really able to keep up the fight anymore.
Dear Veronica, we were having a go at the Turks again, as you will see by the papers. On the 5th, my troop captured 400 prisoners and 7 machine guns, but did not do so well on other days. It was a lively scrap while it lasted. I had a letter from Jim. He is in France and has been promoted to corporal.
I'm having a good time here. The French girls are dead sweet on us.
In fact, it's taking me all my time to dodge a young widow. I don't know which of your brothers is worse.
The war experience changes views for many of those men, brings a reality that they hadn't expected. That reality then impinges on their memories of why they enlisted.
After the Battle of Fromelles, Jim Coles, the second of the Coles brothers to enlist, found himself at another infamous Western Front landmark, Pozieres.
Good luck, Cobber. Clive Wormsley. Jim Coles. Jim. Get order. Yeah, I'd rather be working in the shop.
I'd rather be cutted up to the missus. Good luck to us both, Jim.
Ready, man!
They lose 50% of their casualties, those divisions that go into Pozieres. The objective for what it achieves is minimal. Germans are able to fall back anyway into new positions, so it achieves very little. It's just fighting for fighting's sake.
Jim Coles was 28 years old and among the dead at a place where more Australian blood was spilled than on any other battlefield. Over the course of 2 weeks, there was a total of 11,769 casualties at Pozieres.
You going out, Mr. Coles?
I have to go, Miss Burgess.
What time should we expect you?
Just do as my uncle says and keep up the good work.
Where are you going, Mr. Coles?
My brother, Jim, as I have just learned, has been killed, Miss Burgess. At Pozieres.
Mr. Arthur was wounded there too.
2 days earlier, so he was.
Is Mr. Arthur?
In hospital.
He had shrapnel in his arm, and the surgeons told him we're going to have to amputate it.
Try something new with your Coles, do you mind?
Depends on what it is. Well, your artery is buggered, but I can't attempt to use the veins.
This new young surgeon tried it out on him and it worked, so he kept his arm. But of course he ended up being repatriated back to Australia.
Means that it's my turn to go.
God keep you safe, Mr. George. It was sort of, you know, let's go to the war and get it over and done with. That was his version of sort of most things like that, you know. Let's fix it up quickly and come back to work.
They were horrendous losses, but Pozières had fallen.
Pozières is ours. Captured by our division. We're all very proud of the fact.
Fair enough too, Colonel.
In spite of the losses, the men know that they are better than the Boche. All are keen. All are very keen to have another go.
The loss of life, the soldiers returning home wounded, and the sheer drag of the war were all changing the mood in Australia. In July 1916, when Billy Hughes returned home from London, he discovered that voluntary recruitment figures had collapsed.
Well, you certainly caused quite a stir in London, Will.
86 members of Parliament signed a request for me to take a seat in the House of Commons, George.
Well, you better surrender to them, Bill. Downing Street would suit you.
Now, my dear Perce, I could never live in London. Had I done so, who would lead Australia?
And how do you propose to lead us, Billy? The voluntary system is failing.
I can't bring in compulsion without the numbers in the Senate. We don't have the Senate.
Well, we're already falling well behind on our quotas.
I think Hughes, in a sense, probably lost his sense of perspective on what Australia could do and where Australians were really at in his visit to Britain.
What if I put a question to the people? Would you be prepared to support us in making every effort to win this war? What about that for a question?
So I do think that he lost a sense of what he could ask of the Australian people.
All over Australia, women like Catherine McGuinness were living with constant worry. The war was wearing them down.
Dear Mother, just a line to let you know how the game goes. We're getting another cut at fruit shortly.
I said to put B company on the bloody right!
The last was a bit rough, but we done what we went to do. It was a pretty grim business. Of course, it's easy for a hardened old sinner like me to keep cool. If I go over the dark river, it'll be with a gun in my hand.
He bombed the pillbox and killed the Germans in it. Now, he was left on the field for the next day.
3 McGuinness brothers were at the war. Paul in the Middle East, James and Herbert on the Western Front, where Herbert was serving as an ambulance driver.
Herbert! What's that? You better come.
What?
Wait. Come with me.
What's up, Cyril?
Friend?
Brother.
Sorry. Which one, Jock? Which one of my boys?
I'm very sorry, Mrs. Mack.
Hush, everything is alright. Yes, everything is alright now. 'Cause you know in the morning I'll be here. Yes, you know in the morning I'll be here. 'Cause I